Hello and welcome to another video. In today's video we're going to talk the historical geology of my property. It's a fascinating story of mega floods that happened over thousands of years. Maybe some of you have heard of the Missoula floods. So the Missoula floods came from ancient Lake Missoula, where a glacier grew over a river, blocked it, created a lake. Once the lake got big enough, it broke through that and flooded the Pacific Northwest in a quite epic flood. Now, this didn't just happen one time. This happened dozens of times, like 100 times over 2,000 years. Another flood that happened in that same time frame was the Bonneville floods, excuse me. So the Missoula floods happened like 100 times. The Bonneville flood happened once. The Bonneville flood came from Salt Lake. So that's the flood that is responsible for all the rocks that you see on my property. So I got the property and started finding rocks and was like, whoa, how are these rocks on the top of a hill? So you see where I live, I live up on basically the top of a little knoll, but, up in the mountains, up at like 1,800 feet. And you can see there's some higher mountains around me, but, I'm pretty much the top of the little knoll here. Early on, when I got my property, I dug a pretty substantial trench with my backhoe, and I got about 6 feet down. The layers are a bunch of topsoil. The topsoil has a lot of volcanic ash in it, and once you get down below the topsoil layer, the very next layer is the Bonneville flood. And then I go dig through that, which in the hole I dug, at one side of the hole, the Bonneville flood was about 2 feet deep, and then it got to about 4 feet deep. And then below that is the Missoula floods. Now, I'm going to leave a link in the description of a video that shows the Missoula floods on top of the Bonneville flood. Well, the Bonneville flood happened like right in between the Missoula floods, and it appears like on my property, the Bonneville flood plugged whatever gap the Missoula floods were coming in, and that was the end of the Missoula floods in at least to the depth of my property. There may have been other Missoula floods that came this far south post Bonneville, but they were not up on my property. So what you're looking at here is the very top of the Bonneville flood. So all the topsoil has been removed. Now that's the Bonneville flood right there. Okay, so here's some examples of the rocks that I've been collecting over the past couple years, and these are pretty wild rocks. So I think this is jasper. I think this all here I think is jasper. This is just my best guess. So it is the green rocks are jasper, right? So now this rock here, that is pretty crazy. That is like there is a bunch of other rocks captured inside of this rock. That's a pretty distinct rock. Now, I think this might be a meteor. This just is super heavy and it's super dark. It's my guess that that's a meteor. And this is pretty pretty colorful rock here. Look at that. All right. And that's the biggest thing is just like, how do you get such variety of colors and variety of rocks? Well, it was all brought here by the Bonneville flood. I don't know what all the one is. My only guess is on that one. I know volcanic rock. Like this one is kind of unique here. Here's a volcanic rock, but it's got one side that seems to have been melted, like very hot and fast, that was only able to melt this one side of the rock because it's very smooth. I guess, I want to say melting because of the color change, and how else do you get it to be that smooth just on one side like that? So that's kind of that might actually be evidence of the cataclysms. Look at that. That looks like a rock that was created by sediment. And I think if they're red, they have a lot of iron in them. But so there might be some rare earth rocks rare earth mineral rocks. That might be where some of this stuff comes from. I think this maybe and this maybe might be petrified. That might be petrified wood. Maybe. Kind of has that look to it. And this goes too. I had a big piece of petrified wood I found down the street, but that's, you know, it's pretty random to have variety like this of rocks, right? Like typically you just have like some rocks, right? But this is like fancy rocks. So that's the history of how this property ended up having such a crazy variety of rocks. You know, I've got piles. I'm going to have a lot more. There's tons more to pick up. You know, my biggest question was like, how do you get round rocks on top of a hill that was never a river? You know, there's like, this is kind of a puzzle. So it took me a few years to figure it out. And actually, one of my neighbors kind of told me a little bit of a story. He didn't exactly have it right, but the floods thing is what put me on. So I looked into the floods, and that's where I discovered it. So the Missoula floods were all the way here. Now, a lot of these rocks are covered in this white coating, and that white coating is because the floods left the water here, and the water was alkaline. And that alkaline water just coated whatever, I guess. And so that's why a lot of the rocks are just literally coated in this like crust, this white crust, right? And then when that white crust flakes off, it exposes like a roundish, rounded off rock that's like, you know, super different looking than the rock right next to it, right? So anyway, fascinating stories about, you should look into the Bonneville floods and the Missoula floods because they really is interesting stuff. All right, have a great day. Like, subscribe, and peace.